Today I announced an exploratory committee for President of the United States. I am optimistic. I believe in what we can do together. This is how we're going to build the movement that will change America.
Over the holidays, Elizabeth Warren announced that she had formed an exploratory committee for a 2020 presidential election run. What that means is that she has not technically announced that she's running for president, but she's almost certainly going to do just that. So barring some unforeseen incident, she will be a contender in the 2020 Democratic primary. And in my estimation, she's a fairly strong candidate. She has pretty good name recognition across the United States and has already begun making strong moves, campaigning in Iowa and bringing onto her campaign the digital strategist behind President Obama's 2008 and 2012 campaigns.
The problem we've got right now in Washington is that it works great for those who've got money to buy influence. And I'm fighting against that, and you bet it's going to make a lot of people unhappy. But at the end of the day, I don't go to Washington to work for them. Our government should be working for the people, and that's the movement I'm going to lead.
That said, establishment media has already begun to articulate arguments against Warren's potential candidacy.
Warren may be among the earliest to enter the fray, but she could also be among the earliest to fail.
The Boston Globe put out an article pointing out that a poll they ran with Suffolk University found her support amongst Massachusettsians is equaled by John Kerry, who is obviously not seen as a strong contender. He's probably not going to run. The article did, however, mention a Suffolk University poll that showed Warren to be the front-runner in the critical primary state of New Hampshire. Conservative CNN host S.E. Cupp made mention of the Globe's critical article and poll.
Her hometown paper, the Boston Globe, urged Warren not to run just a month ago.
She, of course, omitted the positive and potentially more significant New Hampshire poll before proclaiming that Warren's candidacy is dead on arrival.
Even this early, it seems like Warren's candidacy is DOA.
S.E. Cupp also echoed a number of Harry Enton's criticisms of Warren, including pointing to Warren's ranking in CNN's most recent 2020 Democratic candidates poll.
According to a CNN poll of Democratic voters conducted in early December, Senator Warren places 7th in a crowded field of potential Democratic candidates, a backslide from a month earlier when she was polling in 4th place.
For context, here's the full list of candidates CNN included on those polls. Warren has backslid from 8% to 3% support. Back in October when she was polling at 8%, Chris Cillizza and Harry Enton put Warren in first place amongst the field. Today they rank Kamala Harris in first place, despite the fact that she has actually backslid exactly as many percentage points as Warren in those same polls. Now, I may not be a genius CNN contributor, but my read of these polls tells me that Joe Biden is in first place and Bernie Sanders is in second place. But we are still in early days here, so I honestly don't think we should count out anyone polling over 1%. One thing the Boston Globe, Harry Enton, and S.E. Cupp have all said about Warren is that she's divisive. Why? Generally, the mainstream media points to two separate issues. One is that her policy positions are very liberal.
And Liz Warren, her very liberal record, combined with the fact that Donald Trump has already gone after her, has made her a very divisive figure nationwide, at least in mind of the public.
The same claim is actually often made of Bernie Sanders, and I addressed that in my last video, so I won't relitigate it here. But essentially, I argued that being very liberal in Washington tends to mean agreeing with most Americans on most key issues. But with Warren, it's not just that she's progressive that makes her divisive for the mainstream media. It's also the fact that Trump has already attacked her repeatedly with the nickname Pocahontas, and her decision to respond by releasing a DNA test.
Well, we all remember the DNA test debacle in which she boasted of her Oklahoma roots and Native American ties and then released a DNA test to prove her Native heritage, which backfired spectacularly as she is in no meaningful way Native American.
There seems to be a general sense that Warren made some big mistakes throughout that whole saga. Some have even suggested that Warren somehow advanced her career by propagating a lie that she is Native American.
Trump's somewhat fact-free response that Warren claimed her status as a minority to get ahead in the world of academia.
But what's actually the truth of all this? Did Elizabeth Warren ever claim to be a member of a tribe? Did she ever advance her career with such a claim? And when it comes to Native American lineage, does she have it? According to Elizabeth Warren, she grew up with an understanding that her family had some Native American ancestry, in particular a great-great-grandmother who was Cherokee. She did not have official documentation of the claim, but the idea that she had a single Cherokee ancestor living during the mid-19th century is indeed consistent with the DNA results that she would eventually come to release. Regardless, Elizabeth Warren is not a Cherokee citizen. Tribal citizenship is not determined by DNA or ancestry, it is determined by the laws of tribes themselves. People can have Cherokee heritage without having Cherokee citizenship, and many Cherokee citizens have predominantly non-Cherokee DNA. While the exact number of Native American ancestors or what tribal affiliations they may have had cannot be determined by a DNA test, we do know from Warren's DNA test that her lineage is predominantly white. Despite this, back when Warren was an academic, she once listed herself in the American Association of Law Schools directory as a minority. I believe it's pretty clear that she should not have done so. It's irritating. But there's also no way in which I could imagine that would have gained her any kind of advantage in her career. In other words, the move was probably wrong, but insignificant. Harvard Law School had once touted her as a Native American when the department faced scrutiny over faculty diversity. According to Warren, this was done without her prior knowledge. Similarly, the University of Pennsylvania's 2005 Minority Equity Report had identified her as a minority when it listed her as the recipient of a 1994 faculty award. In both of these cases, a university is touting a mostly white lady as an example of their diversity. Two forces could have potentially contributed to this problem: the university's interest in representing themselves as inclusive without proper evidence, and Warren's own messaging about her ancestry. But just how and how often she mentioned her Native American ancestry remains unclear. It's hard to blame her if, as she claims, she just mentioned her ancestor over lunch now and then, and the universities pounced at the opportunity to claim a diversity faculty member. So it's unclear whether Warren did anything wrong to cause this problem, and while it certainly is problematic, like with the directory listing, it's hard to see how either of these unfortunate incidents would have helped Warren, as it seems the universities were the real beneficiaries. We only really run into a consequential problem with Warren's proclaimed minority status if she used that status to gain some kind of advantage in her career. In her 2012 run for Senate, her opponent accused her of doing just that. Senator Scott Brown ran ads questioning her background and criticized her about the issue during a debate. Elizabeth Warren checked the box. She had an opportunity, actually, to make a decision throughout her career. When she applied to Penn and Harvard, she checked the box, claiming she was Native American, and clearly she's not. This is essentially what gave rise to the widespread criticism about Elizabeth Warren's lineage. It's also doubly a lie. Scott Brown's claim that she clearly isn't Native American is at best an oversimplification. While there existed at the time no solid evidence that she had Native ancestry at all, there was also no evidence that she didn't. Since then, we've learned that she does have some Native American DNA. So to claim that she is clearly not Native American is clearly an overstatement. Her lineage was not at all clear at the time, and the fact is that despite being predominantly white, she is actually a little bit Native American. More importantly, his claim that she checked a box is totally untrue. Warren claims that she didn't apply at all for many of her teaching positions, instead she was recruited, and the universities have not contradicted her account. In fact, Charles Fried, who headed up the committee that recommended Warren for her position at Harvard in 1995, has indicated that her ancestry was not a factor in hiring her. I can state categorically that the subject of her Native American ancestry never once was mentioned. Warren, of course, has applied for some things. She applied for admissions at Rutgers, where she earned her Doctor of Jurisprudence degree. Part of her application was obtained by the press. It asks if the applicant wants to apply for admissions under the school's program for minority group students. She answered no. Also, regarding her work at the University of Texas, Warren indicated that she was white on her employment documents. So what evidence there is seems to indicate that Warren never used her Native American heritage to gain any kind of advantage in her career. But despite the baselessness of Scott Brown's attacks, they provided a strong foundation to be built upon by the undisputed childish nickname champion of American politics, Donald J. Trump. Somehow he managed to chastise a white lady for claiming a heritage that allegedly didn't belong to her, thus virtue signaling about cultural appropriation, all while using a single individual known widely as a Disney princess to represent an entire race of people. This was a masterstroke of doublethink, mocking racial insensitivity with racial insensitivity to that very same group. In a word, Trump did the impossible, and that word was Pocahontas.
Pocahontas That's this Elizabeth Warren. Massachusetts is represented by Pocahontas, right?
I call her Pocahontas, and that's an insult to Pocahontas.
I was being hit by Pocahontas.
Pocahontas. Pocahontas?
Pocahontas. Pocahontas. What an insult to Pocahontas. I've got more Indian blood in me than Pocahontas, and I have none.
Elizabeth Warren eventually released a DNA test to show that her ancestral connection was more than a family legend, and when she did so, many, including the Cherokee Nation, criticized the move. The Cherokee Nation Secretary of State Chuck Hoskin Jr. said, "Sovereign tribal nations set their own legal requirements for citizenship, and while DNA tests can be used to determine lineage, such as paternity to an individual, it is not evidence for tribal affiliation. Using a DNA test to lay claim to any connection to the Cherokee Nation or any other tribal nation, even vaguely, is inappropriate and wrong." Now, this criticism likely caused political damage to Warren, despite the fact that she does not seem to have ever blurred that line. Beyond that, she has clearly stated the distinction between tribal citizenship and things like DNA and family history. So what prompted her to do that in the first place? Well, it came as a direct response to a challenge issued by Donald Trump.
Who cares? $1 million to charity. I didn't say that. You better read it again.
It was widely reported throughout the mainstream media that Trump offered $1 million to Warren if she could prove that she has native DNA, all while Trump argued that he didn't make such an offer. The media would generally claim that he was lying with clips like this.
I will give you $1 million to your favorite charity, paid for by Trump, if you take the test and it shows you're an Indian.
So he says he didn't say it, he did. Then later today, inspecting hurricane damage in Georgia, he was no longer denying that he'd said what the video clearly shows him saying. Instead, he kind of wiggled out of it on a technicality, or tried to, saying his $1 million promise only counted if Senator Warren actually wins the nomination.
In point of fact, while he did bring up the idea of the DNA test, which prompted her to do so, he didn't actually make the $1 million offer. He was telling his fans that he planned on making that offer as a campaign strategy. So it was a theoretical offer, not a real one. He kind of yammered throughout this, but here's the essence of it.
I shouldn't tell you because I like not to give away secrets, but this one. Let's say I'm debating Pocahontas, right?
Promise you I'll do this. I will take those little kids they sell on television for $2. Learn your heritage. Guy says I was born in Scotland. It turns out he was born in Puerto Rico. That's okay. It's good. You know, guy says I was born in Germany. Well, he wasn't born in Germany. He was born someplace else.
I'm going to get one of those little kids. And in the middle of the debate,
but she proclaims that she's of Indian heritage because her mother said she has high cheekbones. That's her only evidence. That her mother said she had high cheekbones. We will take that little kid and say, but we have to do it gently. Because we're going to be 2 generations, we have to be very gentle. And we will very gently take that kid, and we will slowly toss it, hoping it doesn't hit her and injure her arm. Even though it only weighs probably 2 ounces. And we will say, I will give you $1 million to your favorite charity, paid for by Trump, if you take the test and it shows you're an Indian, you know.
So the claim by CNN, as well as some on the left, including, say, TYT, that Trump owes her $1 million because of the DNA test, well, that's just false. On the other hand, the claim by, for example, some Cherokee Nation leaders that Warren did the DNA test to blur the distinction between tribal affiliation and lineage is also false. She was directly responding to a challenge Trump claimed he was planning on issuing. So Trump acted like a bully, and Warren fell into a political trap. But while both have been called liars over these events, they're the only two who don't seem to have lied here. Trump's insinuation with the Pocahontas nickname may have been based on an implied false premise, and Warren's claim to ancestry may be fairly weak. But as far as I can tell, neither party ever knowingly made an explicitly false claim in regards to this issue. It's pretty much everyone else surrounding the beef who actually misrepresented facts. I think it's also worth noting how this story played out compared to another Trump feud, that being the Obama birth certificate issue. In both cases, Trump attacked a prominent Democrat in a manner that had some racial undertones. He called for the Democrat to release a specific piece of evidence to verify a claim about their identity. The Democrat then released that same piece of evidence that Trump called for, and the evidence supported what the Democrat had claimed all along to be true about themselves. But the reactions to these very similar stories seem to have played out very differently. Undisputably, Warren has faced nothing but backlash. For Obama, the release of his birth certificate was celebrated as a victory. There are probably multiple factors that contributed to the difference, but at least partially responsible is the initial claim to begin with. In the case of the birth certificate, it was black and white. Trump questioned whether Obama was born in America. Obama shows the birth certificate, proves that he was. In Warren's case, it's a lot more nuanced. Her claim was that she had some Native American ancestry. The DNA tests support what she said all along, but it's kind of hard to gloat. I told you I was up to 164th Native American, especially not when the straw man argument that Trump set up by calling her Pocahontas makes it seem as though she was claiming to be fully Native American, which of course she never claimed. Add to that the fact that DNA results have a lot of ambiguities and provide no substantive information regarding an individual's connection to a culture or their status with regards to a sovereign people. What you're left with is a less than triumphant response to an absurd sideshow that may have been better left without the validation of a response.
Nevertheless, she persisted.
At any rate, I remain hopeful that this sideshow won't be a major issue affecting Warren's viability as a candidate. There's reasonable evidence to suggest that any concerns Native American communities feel regarding her DNA test will be outweighed by her more substantial pro-Native policy positions. Warren has frequently advocated on behalf of Native communities, speaking out on issues like missing and murdered Native women, disenfranchisement, and housing issues. But she's done more than advocate. She introduced a bill to address the housing shortage in Indian country. She co-sponsored the Native American Voting Rights Act, and she introduced a bipartisan bill to combat high youth suicide rates in some Native communities. The idea that Native people would reject these substantial moves over a bit of perceived insensitivity is particularly hard to believe in the face of polls like the Washington Post poll that found that 90% of American Indians aren't offended by the team name of the Washington Redskins. If most Natives don't care about the offensive name of a football team, I don't see why they would be overwhelmingly offended by a DNA test. It seems likely they would be far more concerned with the numerous issues of consequence facing their communities. Still, Warren's viability as a candidate won't really be determined by Native American support. According to U.S. Census Bureau figures from 2017, Native Indian and Alaska Native communities make up just 0.8% of the overall American population. The people who could actually derail her campaign over this issue is a much larger group, progressive voters who intend on participating in the primary process. I do have some sense that non-Native progressives are likely to be more offended on behalf of Natives in regards to trivial issues than Natives are themselves. It's possible. But in my estimation, progressive voters have a bigger concern with Elizabeth Warren, and that is her failure to support Bernie Sanders in his 2016 run for president. Most of the media seems to ignore this problem, but to his credit, Cenk Uygur asked her the question on TYT interviews.
So a natural question is, why not back him during the 2016 primaries if you two are the closest aligned in policy?
In her answer, she began by sidestepping.
I thought it was good that Bernie was out there, that Hillary was out there. They were giving two different visions. They were out there through all the states. It made me proud to be a Democrat.
That's not a good start. In fact, saying that it made her proud to be a Democrat could be seen as a subtle dig at Sanders, who outside of the presidential run is of course an independent. When pressed on her answer with this follow-up question,
do you get why some progressives are still mad about that? Massachusetts was decided by 1.3 points, Iowa was decided by 0.3, that perhaps he could have helped him put him over the top.
Here's what she had to say.
There is nothing the Republicans would love better than for us to stand around and shoot at each other over and relitigate what happened in 2016.
Here again, it feels like the senator is sidestepping the issue and subtly pushes another Clintonite talking point that the Democrats need to be united. I personally think Warren would be a stronger candidate if she pointed out why progressives like herself are what the Democrats need to beat Trump. But so far in 2019, she seems to be continuing to push the stronger together narrative.
How does your message compare to that of Sherrod Brown, for example, and others who are making some of the same points?
You know, I think it's great that we have a strong and growing group of Democrats who are making these arguments, who are fighting these fights. That's how we build a movement. We do it together.
Since Elizabeth Warren is widely regarded to be the second most progressive senator in the United States, her clearest path to victory in the Democratic primary involves winning over progressive voters, the very people who supported Sanders in 2016, and as polling continues to indicate, continue to support him today. In order to do that, she needs to be clear that she is the strongest progressive in the race. Make no mistake about it, the progressive message is a strong one to campaign on. Obama, moderate as he was in the White House, campaigned on hope and change. Even Clinton shrewdly claimed to be a progressive in 2016.
Just for the record, are you a progressive or are you a moderate?
I'm a progressive. but I'm a progressive who likes to get things done.
In 2020, there will likely be a lot of non-progressives attempting to claim the progressive mantle. And here Warren has a distinct advantage. Like Sanders, but unlike Clinton, she is a progressive who likes to get progressive things done. Things like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which as of November of 2017, returned nearly $12 billion to consumers who had been cheated by Wall Street banks. She also has a solidly progressive voting record and articulates the progressive message very effectively. Whether she will be able to overpower the strangely united voices of Donald Trump and the mainstream media remains unclear. I don't think her campaign is DOA, but when it comes to all the various pieces that must come together to form what we might call what it takes, what do you think? Does she have it?
In Massachusetts, she's actually polling third or fourth behind Biden and Sanders. If the people in your own home state, the Democrats in your own home state, are saying, you know what, maybe we prefer another Democrat, perhaps it says when other people nationwide are exposed to Liz Warren, they may not like her as much.